Good afternoon and welcome to NMS. This is your ultimate guide to how protein and calorie intake affect your muscle gains. So how does it affect your muscle gains? Okay, so number one, total daily protein matters the most. Okay, so the most important factor for muscle growth, repair and recovery is actually hitting your overall protein needs across the day. So the protein target generally is about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight if your goal is muscle gain or maintenance, and that can actually go up to about 3 grams per kilogram for advanced athletes with plenty of lean muscle tissue. If you meet your daily protein intake, the exact timing before versus after a workout makes much less difference, but it still can make a difference. Okay, so what about protein after a workout? Post-workout protein does help stimulate protein muscle synthesis, okay? The anabolic window is more like 2 to 4 hours after training, not 1 hour as previously suggested in, obviously in a lot of protein studies over the years, we've suggested that, there's an anabolic window. There isn't an exact anabolic window, it's more like 2 to 4 hours. A solid meal with protein after training is generally enough for most people. I will admit that I still take a protein drink after a workout. I still think it's beneficial. So what if you skip your protein around your workout? As long as the total daily intake of protein are high enough and spread reasonably throughout the day, for example, 3 to 5 meals with protein, there won't be a problem. The biggest risk is if you train fasted, wait a long period of time after to eat protein for hours, that could actually affect your recovery and adaptation. Okay. So what about protein before a workout? Well, having protein and carbohydrates before training can also be beneficial. They provide amino acids circulating during your session, and obviously they help to prevent muscle breakdown and can improve in performance when paired with carbohydrates, because obviously we use carbohydrates for fast twitch fibers for energy. So eat a protein and carbohydrate meal within 1 to 3 hours of a workout. Generally, my favorite is chicken with rice. I know it's pretty cliche, but it's probably the best digesting meal. Chicken breast with rice. Chicken digests pretty well, rice digests pretty well. An hour to 2 hours before I work out is normally what I do. So what about calorie surplus and protein? Well, a calorie surplus helps maximize protein synthesis, right? And having plenty of energy and nutrients to allocate to building tissue. Surplus also reduces muscle protein breakdown, which means that net muscle gain is higher. Most studies on hypertrophy are done in athletes eating at or above maintenance. The potential downside is that you could also store some fat unless the surplus is minimized and managed. In other words, you're eating at your roughly above your maintenance, and as you gain more muscle, you start to increase your calories. So what about maintenance calories and protein intake? At maintenance, you can still build muscle, especially if you're a new trainer or if you're returning from a break or genetically responsive to training. But muscle protein synthesis can be robust, but the overall balance of muscle protein synthesis versus muscle protein breakdown is lower than in a surplus. So maintenance is used if you want to recomposition, which is building muscle while losing body fat slowly. Hence, a new trainer who wants to lose a little bit of body fat, or a returning trainer after a break. So what about calorie deficit and protein intake? In a deficit, your body prioritizes energy for survival, which reduces muscle protein synthesis and also increases muscle protein breakdown. In other words, your body is breaking down protein probably at the same rate, potentially not more, because we don't want to be losing muscle. So building new muscle is obviously a lot harder. It is possible if you're overweight or obese, because that means that you have stored energy available. All right, so you're not technically in a calorie deficit because you still have stored energy. It is possible if you are a beginner and if you're using a well-designed strength program with increased protein uptake of about 2.2 to 2.6 grams per kilogram, maybe even up to 3 grams per kilogram. Most advanced lifters won't maximize muscle growth in a deficit. They'll at best preserve muscle mass. Okay, so what happens with a calorie surplus with insufficient protein? Studies demonstrate that when people overeat calories but don't get enough protein, most of the weight gain is not muscle. So in a study by Horton, basically in 1995, what they did was they compared overfeeding with low protein, medium protein, and high protein diets. Okay, so that was 5% protein, 15% protein, and 25% protein was your high diet. All groups gained weight in a surplus, but the low protein group gained mostly fat and almost no muscle mass. So high protein groups gain more lean mass, and even without resistance training. So what happens with calorie surplus and high protein? More increased lean mass gains. In a study performed by Bray et al., okay, in JAMA, subjects were overfed by approximately 1,000 calories per day over an 8-week period. There were 3 groups. There was a 5% protein group, a 15% protein group, and the high 25% protein group. The low protein group gained fat only with no increase in muscle mass. The medium and high groups gained both fat and lean mass. So resistance training in a surplus with a high protein. Now this was another study in 2014 by Antonio et al. Now what happened here was they actually gave a very large surplus of protein as well as a surplus intake. It was 4.4 grams per kilogram body weight. That's quite a lot of protein to be taking in. Now, the subjects in this one didn't actually gain more fat, which basically suggests that if you eat in a protein surplus, your body does not break down protein to gain fat, okay? So this also suggests that enough protein plus training, surplus calories preferentially support lean mass gain. So what's the conclusion to all this? Total protein intake is the most important factor for protein intake. Protein distribution is not quite as important, but for the best results, we should be actually distributing our protein over the day, throughout the day, and especially before and after workouts. In a high calorie surplus with sufficient protein intake, the muscle gains will be greater than maintenance calories and more than obviously a calorie deficit. And in a calorie deficit, muscle can be gained in novice trainers and especially new trainers who are obese. In a calorie surplus with low protein intake, the majority of the gains will be body fat, but in a calorie surplus with moderate to high protein intake, a greater amount of muscle will be gained, even with resistance training. In a calorie surplus, okay, with a high protein intake, 4.4 grams per kilogram, the majority of the gains will be high. So what's the takeaway from all this? Okay, obviously, if we want to lose weight, we will need to keep our protein intake high. That will maintain muscle mass. When we're in a surplus and we want to gain more muscle mass, the higher the protein intake, the better. But obviously, we've got to be mindful of the fact that, you know, it's diminishing returns in a much higher protein intake above, say, 2.2 grams per kilogram. But there has been shown to be greater gains with 4.4 grams per kilogram. Okay, so pretty much double that. That's about 2 grams per pound of body weight. Okay, so basically what we can take away from this is protein is important. Protein distribution is not as important, but will also be helpful. But make sure that when you're in a surplus, you're eating enough protein, and in a deficit, it's very highly important to go and eat in a deficit because we maintain muscle mass. Thanks for listening, guys. Any questions? I know I went through this quick. Any questions on this, by all means, ask away. Cuts of this are going to be on different platforms, but the long form of this will only be on YouTube. So subscribe, like, comment, and help me build the page up so I can do a lot more videos with this sort of content. Thanks for listening, guys.